Hi and welcome to Innovators number 8. Imagine it's the 11th of August 1973. You're at an address, 1520 Sedgwick Avenue, a 102 unit apartment building in the Morris Heights neighbourhood in the Bronx, New York City. There's a DJ playing on a monstrous sound system and you're dancing to the beat. You recognise it. It's James Brown. It's Give It Up or Turn It Loose. But it's only the break in the middle of the song with its refrain, now clap your hands, stomp your feet. Suddenly then it switches from that record's break into the break from a second record, Bongo Rock by the Incredible Bongo Band. For 30 seconds this plays, until another track you recognise drops, but again it's just the instrumental break. You've just witnessed the merry-go-round and the birth of hip-hop. On July the 5th, 2007, 1520 Sedgwick Avenue was recognised by the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation and Historic Preservation as the birthplace of hip-hop. We often recognise certain names from the history of hip-hop, Grandmaster Flash, Afrika Bambaataa, as key proponents of the genre from its birth. However, they took a concept and pushed it further, embedding certain principles within its musical aesthetics. But they didn't invent it. Innovator number 8 took ideas from other DJs he witnessed, like mixing records together, but with his origins in Jamaican sound system culture, like King Tubby before him, had the largest and most powerful sound system in the Bronx. He also MC'd, like Jamaican toasting, to the crowd, shouting out, "There goes my mellow Coke La Rock in the house, there goes my mellow Clark Kent in the house, there goes my mellow Timmy Tim in the house, there goes my mellow Ricky D." In that moment he created two key cornerstones in hip-hop culture, utilising breakbeats and MCing. Welcome to Innovator number 8, DJ Kool Herc. Angus Beattie, writing in the Guardian newspaper in 2011, said, "There are few pioneers of any musical form who could truly be considered the master architect of a genre, but Herc has that distinction." Hip-hop doesn't just have a family tree, it has a birth certificate, a hand-drawn flyer for the party Herc threw in the basement of 1520 Sedgwick Avenue in the Bronx on the 11th of August 1973. Known as the founder of hip-hop and father of hip-hop, Clive Campbell, otherwise known as DJ Kool Herc, spent his early years in Jamaica, specifically in Trenchtown, Kingston. Described by Wayne Marshall in Icons of Hip-Hop, an encyclopedia of the movement, music and culture, he came from the same storied public housing scheme and concrete jungle that produced such reggae luminaries as Bob Marley, Peter Tosh and Alton Ellis. And while living in the government yard of Trenchtown, though, that Herc got his first taste of the powerful sound systems he would later emulate as a Bronx-based DJ. As a small child, he was exposed to music from sound system culture through to his father's large collection of reggae, rhythm and blues, jazz, gospel and country records. And due to the political unrest in Jamaica, Campbell's parents thought it best to emigrate to the USA, as there were potentially better opportunities for the family. So in 1967, Clive Campbell found himself in the Bronx in New York City. He quickly adapted to life there and he continued his passion for music by beginning to DJ in 1970 at parties and community rooms in local apartment blocks. During this time, Campbell became known as DJ Kool Herc, based on his school nickname Hercules due to his prowess on the basketball court and his graffiti tag Clyde as Cool that had appeared all over the city. While Herc built up his skills, his father had become a sponsor for a local rhythm and blues band by providing them with a sound system to play through, and then in turn became their sound man. As Herc's reputation grew, his father asked him to play between sets for the band, but due to other bookings, Herc was never able to, and this meant Herc was banned from using the sound system. However, Herc's father could never get the most out of the system, and one day, behind his father's back, Herc's inquisitive nature got him looking at the system, and soon he realised that he could draw more power out of it by messing around with the hookup to the amplifier. His father, Keith Campbell, was shocked and surprised, as were his friends, and soon the system was the envy of the local music scene, as it was louder and more powerful than any other system around. Herc's father rewarded him with the use of the system for his own parties, and he renamed the system the Herculoids and advertised his parties as DJ Kool Herc and the Herculoids. According to Steve Hagar in Hip Hop, The Illustrated History of Breakdancing, Rap Music and Graffiti, the system was a pair of Shaw speaker columns with a Macintosh amplifier. With the loudest system around and assistance in promoting and arranging parties in the community room at the Sedgwick Avenue apartments, Herc's reputation carried on growing. Herc's father also had advised him of the old Jamaican technique of covering his record labels, so no one would be able to tell exactly what he might have in his collection, because as Herc says, that his father explained, that's how you get your rep, that's how you get your clientele. At the time, gang violence was rife in certain areas of the city. However, in the West Bronx, young high school students outside of the gangs wanted to party. Too young to get into the increasingly reducing numbers of discotheques around, according to Jeff Chang in Can't Stop, Won't Stop, A History of the Hip-Hop Generation. All these youths needed somewhere to party. These reasons may explain why Sedgwick Avenue was ripe for a fresh new party scene. Jeff Chang, describing Herc's approach, was that, with his immigrant friend Kool Herc, he distinguished his crew from the disco DJs by translating the Kingstonian vibe of sound system DJs like Count Machuki, King Stitt, U-Roy and Big Youth for the Bronxonites, by incorporating MCing shoutouts and little rhymes. However, Trisha Rose in Black Noise writes that even though the system and Herc's style were heavily influenced by Jamaican sound systems and dub, Herc claims he could not get the crowd to respond to Jamaican music. As described by Wayne Marshall, along with the Herculoids, Kool Herc was also usually accompanied by the Herculords, a group of supporters and performers who assisted him in various ways. Among the Herculords were such DJs and DJ MCs, since they often handled both turntable and microphone duties, as Kool Herc, Clark Kent, Timmy Tim, LeBrew, and the Imperial JC. Herc also had a number of women in the crew, among them some of the first female MCs, Pebbly Poo, Sweet and Sour, and Smiley. Many of the Herculords, male and female, also doubled as dancers, providing an instant critical mass when it was time to get things going. This was the dawn of what became known in the 80s as breakdancing. Herc and the Herculords would shout out their own names and those of their friends, urge b-boys to dance and use catchphrases, rock on my mellow, to the beat y'all, you don't stop. The crowds were keen on artists like James Brown, and Herc, interviewed by Jeff Chang, said, I noticed people was waiting for certain parts of the record. Essentially, the instrumental break, when, in Jeff Chang's words, the band would drop out and the rhythm section would get elemental. Forget melody, chorus, songs. It was all about the groove, building it, keeping it going. He also says, like a string theorist, Herc zeroed in on the fundamental vibrating loop at the heart of the record, the break. Without headphones to facilitate cueing the record, Campbell began practicing to isolate the instrumental portion of the record, which emphasized the drum beat, the break, and switch from one break to another. Using the same two-turntable setup of disco DJs such as Francis Grasso, Herc used 2 copies of the same record to elongate the break. This breakbeat DJing, using hard funk and records with Latin percussion, formed the basis of hip-hop music. As one record reached the end of the break, he cued a second record back to the beginning of the break, which allowed him to extend a relatively short section of music into something much longer. This innovation had its roots in what Herc called the merry-go-round, a technique by which the DJ switched from break to break at the height of the party. This technique is specifically called the merry-go-round because, according to Herc, it takes one back and forth with no slack. Wayne Marshall explains that, dropping the needle back to the beginning of the break on one record just as the other was about to end and repeating the process ad infinitum, Herc could keep a break and a crowd of b-boys breaking for as long as that particular section would work. According to music journalist Stephen Ivory, in 1973, Herc placed on the turntables 2 copies of Brown's 1970 Sex Machine album and ran an extended cut and mix of the percussion breakdown from Give It Up or Turn It Loose, with its refrain, Now clap your hands, stomp your feet, then switching from that record's break into the break from a second record, Bongo Rock, by the Incredible Bongo Band. From the Bongo Rock break, Herc used a third record to switch to the break on The Mexican by the English rock band Babe Ruth. Although the hip-hop story has identified Herc as the first to isolate and repeat breakbeats in this way, it should be noted that Herc's technical proficiency has never been seen as virtuosic, and so, in the words of Wayne Marshall, his focus on and liberation of the break should perhaps be understood more as an aesthetic than a technical achievement. It was DJs such as Grandmaster Flash and Grand Wizard Theodore, influenced by Herc, who took the idea and, with greater control over the turntables and mixer, would improve on the formula, moving beyond drop-the-needle imprecision by backspinning, scratching and cutting the records while cueing them via monitoring headphones, thus allowing one to mix breaks more seamlessly into another and to isolate shorter and shorter sections for repetition. However, essentially, Grandmaster Flash's technique of backspinning and cutting wasn't fully developed until the summer of 1975, having taken cues from what he witnessed from Herc's and Pete DJ Jones's performances. Theodore would take his cues from Flash and others and discover the scratch around 1976. Additionally, although the Zulu Nation began around the same time as Herc's DJing, it took a little more time for them to establish themselves and their parties and find their unique take on this new style of local music. So for a number of years, Herc's parties were where you could hear this kind of mixing of breaks, and in Wayne Marshall's words, by 1976, Kool Herc and the Herculoids were the toast of the Bronx. As Africa Bambaataa states in David Toop's Rap Attack 2, everybody wanted the funky style that Kool Herc was playing. David Toop also explains, it was the monstrous sound system of Kool DJ Herc which dominated hip-hop in its formative days. This was again due to another aesthetic of what would become hip-hop and why DJ Kool Herc has the title of the founder of hip-hop. Herc sought out records simply for their breakbeats regardless of whether the rest of the song was one you would want to hear. Much like his Jamaican sound system predecessors, Herc attracted an audience that came specifically to hear his particular selection and choice of records. As Wayne Marshall explains further, Herc's breaks records not only came to constitute what is essentially a b-boy canon, they also established the foundational repertory of the hip-hop DJ. Because so many subsequent DJs sought out the same records they heard played by Herc, a great number of these tracks, many of them relatively obscure, though many of them hit, now stand as touchstones of early hip-hop. Moreover, these same breaks became favourites of sample-based hip-hop producers in the 80s and 90s, further affirming their status and ingraining their familiar rhythms and timbres in the hip-hop imagination. 1977 was a watershed year for both hip-hop and for Herc. It was the year of the Great Summer Blackout in New York, resulting in the looting of stores specialising in electronics and audio equipment, which created an explosion of competing crews, each with their own state-of-the-art systems. At this point, the Bronx was evenly split between certain DJs and their crews. In the South Bronx you had Grandmaster Flash, in the Southeast Africa Bambaataa and Zulu Nation, in the North DJ Breakout and DJ Baron, whilst the West and East Bronx nightclubs and rec rooms hosted Herc parties. Herc's competitors had caught up and really began to supersede him with their developing styles and choice of records. What Herc had started had become the viable alternative to disco. Later that year, Herc was stabbed whilst coming to the aid of his friend at a party he was holding at the Sparkle Club. He sustained 3 wounds to his side and 1 in the palm of his hand. He was hospitalised for weeks, and this led to his withdrawing from the scene. As he said himself in Can't Stop, Won't Stop, it made me draw back into a little shell. He eventually returned to DJing and organising parties and maintained some of his audience within the Bronx. However, by the early 80s, things were changing in the world of hip-hop, with the development of styles such as electro, new production techniques, and the early developments in East Coast and West Coast sounds. Herc never made records unlike his contemporaries, and this potentially left him behind the curve. Although Herc maintained his reputation in and around the Bronx, he didn't capitalise on hip-hop the way others that followed him did. Africa Bambaataa and Flash formed groups with rappers, built their reputations as hip-hop grew beyond New York, got signed to key independent labels, and by the early 1980s had made worldwide hit records. Whereas by contrast, in the words of Angus Beattie, Herc was more about the size of the sound system and the atmosphere of the parties he threw, neither of which were things he could duplicate and sell. He stayed in the rec rooms and parks, rocking the beats for the people of hip-hop's epicentre. DJ Kool Herc virtually disappeared during the mid to late 80s, and his tale was lost in hip-hop's history as it began to move faster and faster in new territories. However, during the 1990s, Herc finally began to get the recognition he deserved for his place as the founding father of hip-hop, essentially getting a second chance to build his status through interviews, guest appearances at music conferences, and live guest appearances on stage. I believe DJ Kool Herc deserves his place as innovator number 8, as he was paramount to creating the seed that would become hip-hop. Yes, there were other DJs around, like Pete DJ Jones, who mixed elements of records together. However, these were disco-based. But without the merry-go-round, how could hip-hop be developed? Its core sound of funk-based rhythms provided by the breaks in the records, with emceed shout-outs to the crowd, potentially might not have formed the fundamental aesthetics of what we understand hip-hop to be today, in all its permutations. It's possible to say that he paid the price for not trying to develop his techniques and stay on the cutting edge of the genre he founded. But as Angus Beattie describes, if you were putting it in the sort of language rappers have tended to use down the years, he never sold out and he kept it real. His prize for this was a ton of respect, but virtually no cash. Thanks for watching. See you next time.